Welcome back, everyone. Today's episode is a very special one because we're recording live-ish from the NVMO conference, the heart of Dutch medical education. And while others are currently sitting in a plenary session, I'm over here skipping class for the first time ever in my life with a teacher. That's quite special for skipping class. But it's not just any teacher. I'm joined by the brilliant Anne de la Croix, Assistant Professor of Research in Education at Amsterdam UMC, where she works both at the Faculty of Medicine and the Department of General Practice. From linguistics to leading very varied qualitative research projects, Anne's work touches on reflection, empathy, and patient participation, and she brings in her background in the humanities to keep our field, or make it, well, more human. Anne, thank you for skipping class with me. If one were to meet you in a bar, how would you introduce yourself?
I think I would say, hello, I am Anne. And it's always very hard to introduce myself because I don't fit into a very neat box, which is also my greatest strength, I think. So I would probably say that I have a passion for education, all sorts of education. And I'm a very practical person. I like designing education. And if there's a problem, I like to solve it and come with practical solutions. But at the same time, I'm a very reflective and analytical person. So one of the things that in my research I am known for is to look at concepts, look at the way they are treated in the field and the way we deal with concepts and be quite critical of them. So I would probably say I am at the heart very interested in education, human development. I actually think this field of medical education is kind of an accident that I landed here as an alien on this weird planet. But I really like it here, and I think my way of seeing things offers me a career, really, if I describe it well and explain to people what I see and what different ways of seeing might be. That's a very long introduction. I would also say that I enjoy humca's and that I like singing in a choir, and I have a really nice son and husband, and I live in Amsterdam.
Lovely to hear. We'll let the listeners figure out what humca's is. If they manage, they get a bonus point. So you said you landed in an alien land.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think I was kind of raised, if you will, in the humanities. So I studied linguistics, and there you get a lot of philosophy, sociology, interaction sciences. And the way of working in that field is to think critically about every new concept that comes your way, to accept when people disagree with each other, to find some joy even in the disagreement itself, and in finding the right words to eloquently put forward your unique perspective on the world. So if you would write a paper in the humanities, even the style of writing would be part of the work itself, because that would make it very you. I would have a specific style of writing, put forth my idea, and be in interaction with others. And the truth, it's not the goal to find truth, it's the journey. It's the journey that counts. And then I landed here in the medical field, where people seem to be looking for right solutions, for protocols, for right ways of doing things. And when there's complexity, there seems to be a tendency to immediately look for certainty and to get any kind of complexity or insecurity and to erase it. So I might be oversimplifying it because there's a lot of people that are good at embracing ambiguity. But in general, I like the term aporia, being stuck or landed in a position where you don't quite know what the solution is or where you are, and embracing that. And I think that aporia, the kind of almost discomfort, not quite settled idea of having a solution, I think people in philosophy and the humanities are very good at that. And in general, in the medical field, there's an allergy to that, which isn't necessarily a problem, because I think when you are measuring heart rate or blood pressure or infection values, you don't want any doubt, you want a measurement. But when it comes to things like reflection, empathy, communication, then suddenly it becomes important to see grey tones and to be insecure and to accept differences.
Wonderfully put.
A bit long.
No, it's great. One can tell you've researched this extensively and that you come with a fresh perspective, and that indeed you can't put human factors, human interaction into certain checkpoints or checkboxes. Mm-hmm. The reason I stumbled across you is because I read one of the papers you co-authored, and you have called me a reflective zombie.
I think you self-identified.
Yes, I self-identified after reading your paper.
Yes.
But so students like me, you mentioned that they can become reflective zombies. What do you mean by that?
Well, to start with, I've been a reflective zombie myself. I've done teacher training courses, and in that you also have to write many reflections. And what I mean by zombie behavior is that if I take myself as a learner, when I was learning to be a teacher, sometimes they would ask me to write a reflective report, and I would really write it and sit it. And while I was writing it, I was thinking, oh, what did I take away? How did I interact with my students? And sometimes I was really tired. I would have 8 assignments. I knew my teacher would like me to reflect on my outgoing nature or my high energy and to take more calm. And I would just write down. Today, I would just fake it, really, just to get the assignment done. And that had to do with high pressure. It also had to do with really knowing what the teacher wants to hear. So I call that a reflective zombie, somebody who produces some sort of reflection product without actually on the inside having truly reflected. And I see them a lot in the medical field. The last couple of years, more and more institutes ask for reflection in students. And I think we wrote the paper before AI, but even now with AI, how it's super easy to ask AI, write a reflection report. They will just do it for you. So I think we're actually doing something quite pointless in education at the moment with reflection. And I call that reflective zombies, the behavior of the students. But I want to make it very clear that I don't blame students for this. I blame the system that we created that leads to zombie behavior.
And that was going to be my next question. So why has this happened? Why do so many students turn into reflective zombies?
I think there are several causes. One of them is that we are asking them to reflect in a written way very often. And I think a lot of students don't like writing, so they try to find shortcuts to do the writing for them. I also think that we sometimes ask students to reflect when nothing has actually happened. And actually, normally, reflection just occurs when something happens in your life. So asking people to reflect out of the blue when nothing has happened is very difficult. And the other thing is that students are very keen, especially at medical school, to become doctors. Most of the students I know were waiting for the moment that they could do their kooschappen, to go in their master phase and actually see the patients and become the doctor. So you want to get your points and your credits and pass the test. So when you're writing a reflection report, the goal might be to go and really explore how you're feeling, how you're doing, what your thoughts are, how things went, analyze them. But in students, they're often looking at, what do I have to write down to pass this? And sometimes the shape of that is very different from how they would reflect themselves. So they end up, there's one paper, I love the title. The title is, "They like it if you say you cried." And that is a quote of a student who said, yeah, if you write a reflection report, just put in somewhere that you cried or that you were emotional, because they like it, and then you pass. So students, especially under pressure, wanting to succeed in medicine, look at what the assessors want to hear. And we can't blame them for doing exactly what we want to hear. But we have created this system where they're then becoming zombies to please our demands. And I think that's where we go wrong.
And am I right in assuming then that this is mostly because you get a grade for your reflection?
I think the timing is important, like I said. I think if right now somebody would come in bleeding and we were standing here with a group of people and we would have to do something, and that person is then sent off with an ambulance, we would talk to each other. We would go, oh, how did you feel? Oh, and I can't believe he just stepped up and went to help. Oh, I just stood in a corner. I can't believe it. Am I that kind of person? So reflection occurs because something has happened. So that's my first thing, the timing of reflection. The second, I think, is the shape in which we ask reflection to take place. As you can hear, I like talking. And very often, if I have to come to an idea, it helps me to talk it through with someone. I'm an extrovert. That's my style. So if you would ask me to first write about it, it would feel not natural to me. So I think the way medical students are all human beings. We all reflect all the time. But the way we reflect can be very different. But the way we are asked to reflect at medical school is very often one way only, writing. Also some talking, but mainly writing. And I think the third thing definitely is assessment. The desire to measure how good your reflection is. And I think that's quite a problem, because if you say good reflection means that you do A, B, C, D, then you get reports with all students doing A, B, C, D. Even though they would normally not even write something but play on the piano or go for a run or talk to their best friend. So we are asking people to do something at a time that's not natural for them, in a shape that's not natural to them, with certain demands and an outside norm of what might be good that might not match their style. Yeah, so the measurement is definitely also a large part of it.
You already touched upon what reflection is.
Yeah, and I think it's quite important to keep that definition quite vague. Because one of the problems that sometimes happens, and it also happens with a term like empathy or compassion or professionalism, that we have the tendency to make something very complex, very simple. And then it becomes a checklist. And I've called this skillification in one of my papers. So the danger is that something very complex, like, if we take empathy now instead of reflection, empathy means sitting with one unique person in a unique set of circumstances and finding a way to connect with the inner world of the other. But at medical school, what I often see is people saying, we need to teach empathy. And then we need to test it. Well, what does empathy look like? Well, then in the interaction, they have to say something about the feelings of the other and show it non-verbally. And then you get a whole zombie crowd of students with their heads slightly tilted saying, that must be very hard for you. And I think by making a definition that is quite tight, like empathy means that you show it through and you have behavioral characteristics, then you narrow the diversity of possible ways that empathy can occur. And the same goes for reflection. So I call that skillification because it reduces something innately human, complex, and diverse into a checkbox, a tick box of something that looks a certain way.
So maybe we're even creating empathetic zombies by teaching them that medical communication towards a patient should be like, oh, this must be very hard for you.
Exactly.
And training people to constantly use empty phrases during consultations.
Yeah, to tick the boxes to get your degree. Yeah, I find that problematic because it means we've missed an opportunity here. We've missed the opportunity to really ask. And I think we sometimes see students as blank canvases that come in and we have to teach them how to be human. But we are forgetting these are humans already. And yes, they might have chosen medicine for the money and the status, but also because they want to help people and because there is humanity in all of us. And I would love for education to bring that out in us and to share our unique points of view. And I know many medical students that have had a relative who was ill, who have been very ill themselves, that led to a spark to study medicine. And I would much rather have some time to talk to students about that than to teach them empty phrases so they can get their diploma. So I think sometimes, and especially around these complex, humane terms, we have fallen into the trap of seeing them as teachable skills and testing them and measuring them and saying, look, they have empathy. They can now become a doctor. So we've gone into the whole discourse of checking and controlling and measuring rather than developing, listening, having a conversation and having some space in the curriculum for being human.
Yeah. Curricular time is, of course, the most valuable currency on planet Earth.
Yes.
But I agree. I sometimes think about what it would look like if we allowed students to record a podcast episode or an artwork or indeed something written, but also give them freedom there, right? Written reflection report also, it comes with standard boxes, it comes with a word count.
Yeah.
Why am I not allowed to do a poem?
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
So I think freedom would be great in these, and also the protected time and space to do that.
And I think what you're saying now, Adriaan Norbart, who works in Leiden, he has done this with his students. So he's actually explicitly said to his students, look, you're all going to be in practice, but I have to say if you're doing well. So somehow, can you make your way of learning visible to me so we can have a conversation about it? And if you want to show me how you learn, what is a shape for you that works? And in his group, they all said something else. One of them said, I don't know the specific examples, but I've talked to people who say, well, if I'm on the bike on the way home, I like to actually speak in my headphones about what I've been through that day. Another person said, I want to make a cartoon or indeed a podcast. And he said, that's all fine. And then we will have a discussion about what I've seen and how you've developed. And some students said, what are you talking about? Can I just have an assignment and an assessment chart? And then he said, sure, there's different models of reflection. You can choose one and write your reflection report. So that's, I think, a good example of someone. And I actually recently on LinkedIn saw, I forgot his last name, Pim, a general practitioner in Utrecht, who said the same thing about reflection. Let's stop saying it also always has to be a written report. But I think that we have some sort of fear for assessment. Then how can we check if it happened? And that question, how can we check, leads to checklists, which in turn leads to zombies. Our checklists are food for zombies. So it takes away from authentic learning.
So checking the boxes, checklists, they're the heart of the problem?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's an underlying need for control and accountability. And I think also fear of what happens when we let go. When we wrote The Reflective Zombie, actually one of the reviewers, it might have been a different paper, but a similar style of paper, one of the reviewers said, your argumentation is very strong and I completely follow your line of reasoning. However, if this is true, then some of what I'm doing is pointless, so I have to reject the paper. That was his conclusion. So that kind of shows how we don't seem to have alternatives, or how a lot of people think there is no alternative. You either have to test something or it's not important. And my message, especially about these humane qualities, how are you a person? What do you know about yourself? How are you empathetic? How do you reflect? How do you feel about the profession? What do you want to change about the profession? All these things, if you really value them, do not test them, but give space for them to grow and feed them. And, you can stimulate them. But you just said that teaching time is very valuable, but there's often the worth of it is linked to assessment. Does it lead to us saying if someone is qualified or not? And that's where the problem lies.
And I think there's so many beautiful learning moments in medical education throughout your career, right? You will always have moments where you don't even need to fail big time, but you have little moments where you could have done better. And I also would often love to really present myself in a vulnerable way, get feedback, reflect myself. But I tend not to do that, because then assessment will teach me that that's not the socially accepted way or norm of doing things. So I also tend to speak to friends and relatives instead of those who have also been there.
And to me, that's quite... when I was a teacher, I noticed this happening. And it's quite sad to me that, because I think at the heart, we said there should be time for the person behind the student, the person behind the doctor, because we value these things. But then the system we built up around it completely kills any kind of vulnerability or genuine or authenticity. And I think that's sad. One of the responses we had when we wrote The Reflective Zombie was from an English junior doctor, and that was back when we were all on Twitter. And she actually wrote, this really rings true to me, because when I was a medical student, I really reflected through my writing, but I always failed because it didn't fit the assessment criteria. So then I just started writing what they wanted to hear, and I became a zombie. And then I thought, this is someone who was learning within the walls of an educational system, which is what we want. But then the way we organized the system made her stop learning. And my next question was, where is she doing the learning now, or the reflecting? Did we send her out to do that in her private space? And it feels very strange to me that we are doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, here in the Netherlands, it's a 6-year program, and then actually afterwards you need to do a lot of unlearning if you truly want to get to deep, real reflection, I feel like. But that's how I personally feel.
Yeah, and I think also reflection gets a bad reputation, and things like coaching and reflection, and that is also a waste. And I think sometimes in Dutch we say reflectiemoeheid. It means reflection tiredness. If you're asked too much to reflect in a way that doesn't ring true to you, and you just do it to pass, then the word reflection also becomes infected by oh, another thing I have to do. And also what you just said, I have to play this role because there's people watching. So I'll just play the role of being very reflective. And I think that's a shame, because if you get the space to really reflect in your own way, in your own time, I think for many young doctors that could be great if there's a safe space to reflect and to be vulnerable and to not be judged and assessed.
I think you're completely right. Limited data as it may be, but I had a coach who believed sort of the same crying thing you mentioned earlier, that intervision, right, where you discuss clinical cases, is only really good when you go so deep the student cries.
Yeah.
That was sort of the checkbox exercise of that coaching style. And then I had another coach who realized these 20, 30, 40-page reflection documents we need to write and only also reflect about ourselves. We're not allowed to reflect about the institution around us, right? We're only allowed to reflect about ourselves and our shortcomings. He's like, write it if you want to, submit it whenever you want to. For coach, I want to have a coach group where you get to do what's important to you and where we have a safe space to discuss anything. Yeah. And it's transformational compared to.
Yeah, but but that's the kind of thing that I've seen before, where teachers kind of say, I have this obligation to assess, so I just make a shortcut, or I'll tell everyone you've passed, so that there becomes space for learning. Yeah. And to me, it's absurd that as an educational system, you create something called assessment, and then you have to trick that system in order for learning to occur. And I also hear that from supervisors and also in people that have to give feedback in the workplace, that they say to their students, don't worry, I'll pass you anyway, put the forms away so we can learn. So assessment is almost a blockage in the way of learning. But I think what you just described, that a teacher says, the assessment will be there, don't worry about it, to create space for safe learning. Yeah, it's amazing.
So we should take this moment to applaud those teachers who professionally resist these norms and really try to empower their learners. Yeah. Do you also have thoughts on how to change this sort of rigidity in the educational system?
Yeah, currently I'm talking to a team here in the Netherlands that are considering taking reflection out of their core competencies to learn, and also to stop assessing it and to look at a different shape. And I think they're very brave, because the zombie article and the message I'm portraying here, I've said it in many places, and in many places I get a lot of, we recognize it, the paper is downloaded a lot. But still, to really change this system, it seems to be very hard. And I see there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear that we have to have evidence that we're doing the right thing. But I think there's also a thing as a moral obligation we have to see. And I think if we want to get healthcare that is person-centered, then how can we build a system to get healthcare professionals in which the human is not allowed to show itself? So I think it's sometimes a vision, or to do the morally right thing, or to be more aligned in your vision and how you actually do things, should be stronger than the fear of of not assessing something. And I also think that if you do stop assessing reflection, maybe 2 or 3 people reflect a bit less. I don't think that has to be the case, but suppose so. I think now, with the way we're doing it, a lot of people reflect less, because even the people that would reflect normally stop reflecting because of these rules. So I think that there isn't actually so much to lose, but people are still scared. And this team I'm talking to, they are very brave. They're really talking about, if we see reflection as something that helps you to become in their case, a better teacher, then why do we test it as a goal? It should be a means to get to the goal. And a means to get to a goal, well, it's also, how do you get to your goal of becoming a good doctor? It's also taking care of yourself. Are we now going to measure if everyone sleeps well and score you for that or something? There's a lot of things that you need that could contribute to becoming a good doctor, and reflection is one of them. And it's really weird that we give reflection such a central role and we want to control it so much. Yeah, so it's, sorry, that's a lot of thoughts in one chunk.
As someone who's part of the system, it makes complete sense that we should rethink that. And you mentioned a lot the check the boxes, the skillification, the sort of put putting a box around it, putting guidelines around it. And in your talks, you have quite a nice few examples. Could you maybe share one with us, what that looks like?
I think to show the absurdity of changing such complex examples into a concrete list of behaviors. Well, in my talk, I will go back to the what is love example. In my talk, I said, what is love to you? And I invited everyone to think of a small thing, and you can think of something you do with your partner, brother, sister, kids, whoever you love at home, little things to show your love. And in my house, that's why I have a bag of crisps here. One of the signs of love from my husband to me is that when I've had a very busy day and I'm out late and I come home, that he leaves this specific type of crisps that I like and he doesn't like out in the kitchen. And he will already be sleeping. I come home late. I see that and I think, he loves me. Now, lots of people have examples like that. Little things your partner does. But if I now list a few of those little things and said, that is how I'm going to measure love, well, no one will get the points of these crisps. If I say you get 2 points if your partner also leaves crisps for you at the end of a busy day, well, you will now probably fail because I assume you don't like hamkaas because nobody likes hamkaas crisps. So it's a very precise way of expressing love that I then use to generally judge other people's relationships. And the same with being hungry is also a good example. So if we describe what does hungry look like to you, well, I asked someone and they said someone who looks a bit restlessly, maybe touches their mouth or rubs their tummy. Well, you can all do it at home now. Just touch your mouth, look restlessly, and touch your tummy. I can then now say, if I've made that into a checklist, you're all hungry. Even though I can't tell if you're hungry, you are the only one who can tell if you're hungry. So that's the same with reflection. And I find it very arrogant to say to someone, you can't reflect. I find it fairer to say, if something big happens in your life, how do you deal with it? Or what happens with you? And if you feel like someone can't reflect, I actually think there's something else going on. There's something they can't do, and you think it's because their reflection is wrong. So I think it requires more analysis and more questions, really, in how people experience their own individual thoughts and feelings. I'm not sure if it worked now, but you have to listen to the recording.
Yeah, no, we'll apologize to the listeners for having to listen to a bag of crisps. But it's a brilliant example. So is there for students or anyone else who now says, okay, well, then at least I want to reflect properly. Is there a right way to reflect?
No, for me, no. I think there's different ways of looking at reflection as well, which has also been beautifully described. And I think part of reflection is to analyze situations. There's also a risk of reflecting too much. There's a lot of evidence that a lot of reflection especially into situations that didn't go well. So if you have examples in practice that you didn't do very well, you're critical of yourself, and you're invited to reflect again and again, it can actually stimulate rumination. And I think especially when I look at the general population of medical students, there's a lot of self-critical people there that are high achievers. I think there's a danger of asking you to reflect too much to get people anxious and overly self-critical. So that's the cognitive part of reflection. There's also the feeling part of reflection. So I think it's probably smart to be aware of your feelings and go through some sort of emotional education. I also think it's smart to analyze situations. So there's elements of reflection that I really value, but the way in which you address these and give space to them is, I think it's a journey that we have to explore together. And I'm very happy to say that there's colleagues that are doing this right now. So rather than saying, this is the norm, you have to adjust to it, there are a lot of teachers now working with, who have I got in front of me? And what is the power of this generation, this young generation in front of me? If we don't do that, then we risk, people from a previous century setting norms that are never contested. So I think, I don't know, this was what was the question? Did I answer your question?
I think there's a lot of thoughts you leave me and probably the listener with to reflect on in our own time. No, the question was sort of good. Is there something like good reflection? Is there something like good reflection?
Yeah, I think for me, the core of reflection is to be able to take on a different perspective. So reflection to me would be something has happened. Can I look for the distance at what I did? Could I have done something else? How might somebody else have felt? Can I get new ideas? And I think it often also has to do with a certain intention to the future. Do I want to change something in the future? Have I become someone else for the future? So I think it has some sort of future direction or future action in it. And I think it has to do something with a perspective shift. And I'm very careful of going further than that in a definition of reflection.
That's great. I think that's a great end also, because I was going to ask you, is there anything in particular you would like to leave students or educators or anyone interested in reflection with?
Yeah, I think it would be worth, if we have a complex concept like reflection, empathy, that we first ask, what does that mean to you? We don't have to give a definition and a list of observable behaviours. Medical students are smart, and they've been alive for a lot longer than the years that they've been at medical school, and they probably have friendships and relationships, so they are already human. Let's trust that. So there has to be some trust. There have to be some brave teachers and brave students, also like you actually, and there has to be space for conversation. And first ask questions, and accept that there's diversity. So I think we must raise we must become more comfortable with ambiguity, with diversity, with aporia, with being in a situation where you might not know the answers, and raise our level of comfort with that. Yeah.
Which again is medicine. We very often do not know the right or the answer at the moment, or not yet, or we also get things wrong. So I think it's only very logical we do this. So thank you very much. And I was reflecting on this a little bit, and I was like, what do I really have about reflection to say? And I think you said so many beautiful things. So I'm going to say something very different. If anyone ever has a bad day and they need a little bit of uplifting, use your favorite search engine and look at people selling mirrors. Speaking of reflection, that's a great one for those who have never looked that up. People selling mirrors.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and it's a great initiative to do this. And I think it's part of reflection is being able to shift perspectives, and we don't often enough ask our students their perspective. So I think it's great that this podcast is here.
Thank you. And at the same time, we like to stay amongst ourselves in the medical world. So thank you for coming into the medical world and bringing fresh wind and a fresh perspective to the medical community, because I think we can learn a lot from that. So thank you very much.